That's it. So we're all set to go. Okay, so we got a little project to look at this in part because point of sale software, there's just so many different options out there now. And try to give just the tip of the iceberg on some of it, I guess, on what we've done and everything. But we kind of got this project in part because it was Whole Farm Revenue is a product that Risk Management Agency has, and I'll talk about as well. And we thought, well, there may be a connection in terms of, getting people that do point of sale and also Whole Farm Revenue. And we're actually having a hard time finding people that do both, but it's kind of there. But this is a picture here of the Prescott Farmers Market in the winter. And there's a lineup here to the vendor there. It's actually to Whipstone Farms. But one of the reasons why they have this kind of lineup is because they're running everything through their POS system. They use Square at the farmers market. And interesting, they have like 3 different POS systems they use for different things. But they feel that for like the farmers market, Square gives them an awful lot of options for reporting and tracking information. So, they have this lineup here. In part, they could be running people through a lot probably quicker, but they want to be able to get all the information in terms of what they're selling, because then they use that then for the next week to go out, okay, this is how much production we have, this is how much we can go. And it's interesting to hear Shanti work through her mind in terms of processing this and everything going through. But so the next week then they'll take that information and see how much they should be picking of different crops, and then eventually even the next year thinking about, well, maybe I should be planting a little bit more or maybe a little bit less. But yeah, it's really hard to kind of figure out just where even all the sales are coming from and where all the product is moving in terms of the weight and volume and everything in there. So this is kind of a flow chart here of the point of sale system. And basically, what you have is the card information. Everybody's probably gone somewhere where your card gets swiped. Even, National Park Service now, I noticed some places use like Clover as where they swipe, and then that authorizes everything. So that activates a transaction to your credit card. And then of course that goes to where it automatically, eventually puts money back into the merchant's account. And even in the university, it's kind of interesting in the sense that, when I first came, we didn't have anything associated with tracking. And then they realized that, wow, if we give everybody that does a lot of traveling, like Jaws and myself, we give them this P card here. And then now we can track everything, in terms of when these are made. And then that kind of just, even made things, it's kind of like this in the sense that it gives an electronic record of everything that's going on. And that's a lot easier than trying to reimburse what we pay individually for in some ways. So on the sales data reporting of the POS things first you have is the sales data by the time of day, the item, the customer. That's the other thing on the P card. They'll notice, oh, you put this gas in, when you should have already been back or something, so I mean they're tracking all kinds of interesting things about not just your gas purchase, but when you did that gas purchase. Does this here make sense? So that's one of the advantages of having that electronic record there. You get everything by that timestamp. And then of course, this allows you to filter down through in terms of, different types of payments, and then also the sales activity by even for a particular date range or even time of day, kind of things that are going on. And this is kind of interesting if you look at, this is a couple of years ago, but in terms of online payments, credit card was about 44%, debit card 32%, and PayPal here was about 14%. So obviously, if you're online, you're not going to be doing a lot of cash. But if you look at the market share of all payments, credit card is still number one there, and then debit card. So, I mean, one of the things as a merchant you realize really quickly is that if you don't allow people to pay by credit card, you're passing up a lot of sales, or credit or debit card. The number is really high. It's almost like upwards of like 25%, because I mean, a lot of people, just face it, that you open their wallet, but they don't have any cash. They just have cards, So I don't know. That's where the fees and everything that are associated with them have just a lot of businesses have come to say, well, yeah, I mean, it does cost me the 3%, or that extra, but I gain up for it in terms of getting more customers, and then it also helps me in terms of sort through the different transactions that I have. But cash is still number three, and it's kind of interesting. I remember going through a Chick-fil-A not long ago, and she was saying, "Are you going to pay with cash?" And I said, "I don't. Does anybody pay with cash?" And says, "Most of our people that come through pay with cash." She said, "So totally shocked me, but there is still a lot of cash that does go on, and there is even some. One of the things down here is POS financing, tied back to the point of sale card financing method there. Because you keep track of all your customers, the feedback, and also things with regards to managing for your social media and newsletters. Those kind of things can be then sent to drive off of the POS system as well. So this is a table that was put out by the New York Farm Viability Institute. I put it out here because it gives a lot of information here on just a few of the programs that are out there. Square, is kind of, I think, one of the leaders in terms of being one of the first in terms of adopting and having the card reader with the smartphones go on. And the other reason that a lot of producers like it as well is why, because it's free in the sense unless they have a charge, so they're not paying a monthly fee or subscription fee on there. So if they use it and they pay for it, if they don't use it, then they don't have to pay for it. That's what we hear from a lot of producers that do that. Some of the others down here, Clover, I think, is a little bit more popular, but you can see down here, there's quite a varying degrees here in terms of checks for like customer service, customer management. All of this kind of depends, but one thing that's kind of come out as well, there tends to be a difference between those that are online versus those that are like at the marketplace there. Just to look at it again, I mean, like Square will provide this free app reader here for you, and then they also have things connected with the e-commerce online, as well as Square for retail. That's kind of, Shopify is another one we'll just talk about as well. That tends to be what a lot of them do that are selling more just on the web. As I mentioned, Square has that 2.75% kind of flat constant pricing that you pay there, which is pretty reasonable, I guess, when you think that the card could be getting 2%, right? Anyway, most cards that you might have there. So that's I think fairly reasonable, but all these other, a lot of these I haven't even heard of. Like Bindo POS. I haven't heard of that. Um, and they're one of the top on the PC magazine there. QuickBooks is something that is kind of behind in getting in terms of their POS system, but a lot of people, and including farmers, use POS for their tax or QuickBooks for their taxes. So the logic would be that, well, they can integrate that with QuickBooks, but I know a lot of people that use Square, just transfer their records to their QuickBooks and still use their taxes that way. And you know, um, Shopify, I guess, is one I've also seen a fair number of producers that are doing that, especially, like I said, if they're doing online. I know was the I forget his name, but he does a lot of the beef over out of Chino Valley there down into he's on the farm board with Farm Bureau. What's his name? Anyway, they use Shopify because they're sending out UPS packages pretty much every day with their Shopify, and they found that works well with them in terms of tracking all of their customers and going through everything. So they have a monthly fee there to work through there. So, I mean, I guess, like I said, all of it comes back to location, value, and getting to these cost of goods sold here. And most all the programs seem to be, have the ability to export to like Excel or, to work with spreadsheet kind of format, to moving data in and out. But, I mean, the good thing about the software is they'll run their own reports like, Square, and keep track of that real-time inventory as well that you might have, and Shopify as well. That's one of the advantages of having a POS system, is keeping track of what you actually have on hand as well. Because what you start out with and sell, so what's left is your inventory. So that's pretty handy to have. I was going to say that you might think of just having like one system, but he said the farm I was talking about over in Chino Valley over there, they have Square for their farmers market sales. They use barn to door for the CSAs and kind of the subscription, the orders that they have, because barn to door handles those transactions, whereas Square doesn't really do that. But they like Square at the farmers market because it provides so much more detail in terms of what each customer orders and everything and all the reports. So it's kind of interesting that you might think of, well, on a POS, you just get one system and that's it. But they kind of had it where they have different systems for the different markets that they have, which is kind of interesting because they also do some wholesale flowers and whatnot. So there's a Gather Florist program that they use that specifically tracks the flowers and kind of the wholesaling and that customer segment. So I don't know, it's really kind of interesting. I put this link up here because this is a webinar recording that we did with as part of this grant on the Western Farm Management Committee. Some folks from Idaho and Wyoming and Colorado were also involved in it. But this gives kind of like an interview here if you want to go to look at. We haven't broken it out into kind of more pieces formats that are more easy to digest, I guess. But you could listen to the whole thing if you want. Kind of our recording of a couple different producers on their different systems. And Shanti talks about the systems that they use kind of based on their market segment they're going through there. And I guess, why POS, you might think about getting the information up front is really important, right? Because once you start down a system, right, it becomes a lot more difficult to switch, right? Because you've got all your information there. It's almost like a tax system, right? Uh, have anybody used a tax program for their taxes? Okay, how long have you had that same system?
2003.
Yeah, so once you get it, you just kind of stick with that because why? Oh, because everything from the year before feeds forward, and keeps track. So it's kind of the same thing. So any upgrades or anything kind of feed forward as well. So it does become kind of more difficult to switch, as you go on, unless you have kind of a strategic way or interest in trying to switch for some of the business things that you're doing there. So again, some of the goals here for the POS system, you want to be able to attract the customers that you have and those that you don't have, keep those transaction costs reasonable. And at some point, you want to be able to take your records to where you can put them in what we would call the Schedule F and the Schedule C. That's, becomes a difficult thing, I guess, for everyone, because at some point, so like when you have an apple and you sell that at the market, that's still part of your Schedule F because that's a farm product. But if you take that apple and then make applesauce and then sell the applesauce, then technically that after that processing stage there, that becomes over to the Schedule C part of the operation. And that's where it gets kind of confusing because even like the system on the whole farm revenue protection, they insure for the farm value. So if you're doing value added processing beyond, like say jam, the apples made into jam or the strawberries made into jam or other those products, that goes on the Schedule C, and that's not part of the farm operation. But we'll talk about a product that they came out with this year called Microfarm that is intended to kind of address that because they realize that there is some, post-production value in terms of those value-added activities, being able to insure for that. This is another example of the different systems that are out there, kind of the check boxes going across from the National Young Farmer Coalition. And so you can see if you're looking at just here, like the e-commerce storefront, there's a lot of these POS systems here. We'll check off on that. And, Harvest Hand, Harvey, Local Food Marketplace. That's another one that we also interviewed one of those in one of the webinars on that link back there. But CSA Ware, Barn to Door, Square is not even on the list there. But you can see distribution management, that's something pretty much all of them have. But when it comes to like CSA subscription, you can see, only about half of them have that. And when it comes to order forms to like create availability lists to send to your customers or things, there's just a handful across there. So you kind of have to look and see kind of what are some of the features you might think are important for what you're doing as to what you would want to keep there. And this just goes a little bit further on, just describing some of the different things that the different products that are out there. Like if you're doing a CSA where you're selling shares, to customers at the beginning of the year and hitting them, then they identify the Local Food Marketplace, Farmago, CS Ware, those as being, most attractive for that. And if you're doing home shipping down here, though, that's where you get Barn to Door, Gray's Cart, Food for All, some of those. So you can see just by looking at all these lists over here, that there's an awful lot of software packages out there for POS. Just if nothing else, you come away with nothing else to realize there's an awful lot of options out there. There's probably going to be a lot of consolidation, though. My guess is too, over time, with some of these programs, combining some of the features and trying to, there'll probably be some merging as they try to become more things to more farmers as we go on in time there. And with regards to some of the fees, you can see there is quite a range. Like local food marketplace here has a pretty steep setup fee, 500 to 999 there, compared to like when you were saying with Square, where you don't really have a setup fee. It's free to get started. You just pay once you're doing your sales there. So consider all these with there. And then also when we think about a POS system, we want to think about how is it going to help us address some of the risks that we have to our operation. And I think some of the main risks that we think we would have, like Miles mentioned, market, being able to sell, that's a risk. So hopefully the POS system would help in terms of being able to identify, at least I'm going to be able to sell this product or I'm not, before you plan it. We're still going to have production risk, which can be water, a large part here, but also pests are a big issue as well. We have labor risk as well, in the sense that it could be your workers, you not be able to get workers, or it could even be you and your own health, right? What happens if you are the main person and you get hurt, your back or something, so these are all kind of risks to the operation here. And we have to think about how can we deal with those? Well, POS is one way to kind of help manage things, but there's also insurance out there to protect from like adverse events as well, right? So this is actually over in Chino Valley, farm over there a couple of years ago, and the runoff area was only like it's like less than 100 acres above here, but you can see that they got flooded out on a lot of their vegetables there. So, looking in hindsight, we can look back and say, well, if they would have just had one of these insurance products, that would have really worked out well for them, right? Fortunately, they have a place, another, a little ways away, so that didn't get flooded. But this is what whole farm revenue was kind of intended to be about, in terms of help people that are selling it at a higher price, at the farmer's market price, that is higher than like the wholesale price. And we'll talk about that some, but overall, I guess this just gives a snapshot of crop insurance over time. And what do we see here on this graph? We've switched primarily from a yield insurance here back in the early or mid 90s, where now we're pretty much all revenue insurance, right? So what's the advantage of revenue over yield? Well, revenue is yield and price, right? A combination of them both, as opposed to just yield, which doesn't consider, the price element. So that's one of the reasons why whole farm revenue protection was kind of started, is to try to be a catch-all for a lot of the specialty crop producers that didn't necessarily fit the commodity insurance product for, like, say cotton, wheat, or corn, those commodities, where there's kind of like an established market. So to start this program, it's based off of your Schedule F. They use a 5-year average, or 3 years if you're a beginning farmer, the last 3 years. There is ability to consider trends up to 10% of the average, but there's some of the different direct marketers that we've talked to. One of the reasons that they don't use whole farm revenue is they feel that it doesn't allow them to grow as much as they plan to expand their business. They're growing so fast that they're way above this, the trend line that they would have in the last few years. And the producer premiums are subsidized quite heavily. We'll show you they're subsidized up to 80%. Unless you're a beginning farmer, then it goes up to 90%. So you think, wow, if the subsidies subsidize 90%, why don't we have more people signed up for it or more payouts? But I don't know, that's another question here. But you see, this is the subsidy portion here. If you just have one commodity, this is coverage level on yield. With 50%, there's 67% subsidy. And then up to 75%, it's 55% subsidy. But if you go up to 3 commodity counts, then it's subsidized at 80%. Well, if you're a beginning farmer, you get 10% discount off of that. So you're basically getting a 90% subsidy rate up here up to that 75% coverage.
Who offers this insurance?
Okay, yeah. So this is offered through it's a reinsurance product. So it's offered by private companies, but it's insured through risk management agency through USDA. So it's kind of a joint government private I guess venture in terms of this. And I have a slide in here in terms of where you can go to in terms of contacting agents. But I will admit that one of the things that we hear back is that a lot of the agents don't really want to take on a lot of the small growers with whole farm revenue because the transaction cost of going out and settling all these claims are rather high compared to some of the policies that are just driven by automated measures like the rainfall index just automatically generates the premium or the claim based on what the rainfall recording is with the NOAA weather stations. So I guess pretty much covered this all. The beginning farmers, again, that 10% reduction off of these here. So that'd be up to 90% subsidy portion there. And if you have nursery and animals, you can only insure for up to $1 million of expected value. But that's way above where most of the small beginning farmers are. And there's a new product out called Microfarm. We'll talk about some that goes up to $100,000 and simplifies some of the record keeping requirement. But to get an idea of just kind of what things would look like for your operation in terms of the crops you might have and whatnot, there's a cost estimator as a tool that Risk Management Agency has on their website. You can go and you pull down here the whole farm protection. So we put for 2023, we can pull down Navajo County, the insurance farm, whole farm revenue, and we select down, this is an example here, where I just put in where we have $10,000 as kind of like a historical average for the last 5 years. So that's also equal, we have a $10,000 expected revenue as well. So that's key important in the sense that we can't have an expected revenue coming up that would be less than what we would have had before. In this example here, I just put where 70% of the revenues coming from the cow-calf operation, 7,000, and forage production would come the other 30%. So just to give you an idea of the number of different crops that are available, when you pull on this commodity here, you can pull down and there's a whole, like 100 different crops that are allowed there. And it also makes a distinction like in terms of between cow-calf versus stocker operation as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But it basically covers almost everything that you could imagine. In terms of just then if you click through and get the estimates here, you can pull up in terms of like getting 50% coverage here. That'd be like $5,000 of the $10,000 expected revenue. This would cost the producer, you as the producer, with the administrative fee of the $30, like $61, get $5,000 in coverage. So this would be reduced even down by 10% on the subsidy would increase there. 10% if you're a beginning farmer. So, I mean, it's not free, but it is fairly reasonable, I guess, in terms of for that 50% coverage level. But for commodity crops like wheat and corn, uh, typically that 50% coverage level is provided free. The premium is provided free by the government, and then you still have to pay the administrative fee, but otherwise uh, there is what they call a catastrophic coverage, and whole farm doesn't have that, but it's pretty close to that in terms of being there. If you went up to the 75% revenue, 7,500, the premium increases quite a bit. It goes from 188 to 786 because the odds of you falling below that 75% are much greater than the 50%, right? Especially if you have for commodities. So the producer premium there then is 159 versus over here it's just 61. But you have to keep in mind this example again that 84% of the premium as well as the A&O, which is as the administrative and operational fees that are paid to the reinsurance company. So on your flash drive, I put in there's a fact sheet here on whole farm revenue protection. It's about 4 pages. You could read that as well some too to get some background on it. You click on this link that will take you there to it as well. But I guess one of the key things to think about is that the subsidy is really quite high. So if the premium rates are actually correct, you would think there would be a pretty good return coming back to producers, that are insured. But we haven't seen that in the numbers thus far either. So in terms of as mentioned, where to get this, the agents to contact, this website here, rmausca.gov, the tools agent.html. That is where they have a list of the companies that are listed there and available. If you wanted to sign up for this, the sales closing date for Arizona here is February 28th. So it'd be coming up in a couple of months. But first you have to think about, what do I have my Schedule F records in place? Because it's going to be, you need 3 years of this as a beginning farmer to essentially get signed up for it. So that's another reason to think about keeping track of your records, and then also filing the Schedule F, because that would at least give you the option to take out a policy like this down the road. So that's one reason to keep in mind. Those we're keeping workbooks that we handed out and everything. If you can use those and then use those to file your Schedule F, that'll establish a record base that you can go to and build off of to put this together. So I said, we haven't seen the payouts here in Arizona in 2021. There was only 17 policies in the state, and the producer cost exceeded the indemnities by quite a bit, so which is kind of surprising, because you'd think, given the rate of the subsidies, that there would be a lot more paid out in terms of indemnities than in the producer cost. But I think a lot of it points to that when you have 2 to 3 different enterprises, you're fairly diversified there. So you may be more diversified than what the ratings are actually showing in terms of on people's Schedule F revenues there. At the U.S. level, there's less than 1% of all farms who are signed up, 0.09%. And again, there was a lot more paid out in terms of producer costs than what came back in terms of indemnity claims. Even though we can look at a lot of examples and see where people are kicking themselves for not having this policy, in terms of having events like that flooding that occurred there and other things, saying, wow, or the frost in particular, is another thing for, like the blossom crops, like the almonds and all those, and apples in southeastern Arizona, I think would be a prime candidate for this because they tend to get really hit hard with some of those freeze events. So to combat this issue in terms of kind of the low sign up here, Risk Management Agency just this last year came out with what's called the micro farm program. And the idea was to make it to where it was a lot more simple in the sense that on the whole farm side, you have to kind of provide some expense items, and a whole farm just makes it to where there's just one commodity. You don't separate out into your different commodities. Of course.
Why do you suppose so few farmers sign up for the insurance?
Well, I think some of it's probably related to the fact that not everybody knows about it. And then the other part is that a lot of the agents aren't really pushing it because of the cost associated with dealing with settling a lot of the policies, especially for the small farms. I mean, they don't make nearly as much money on a 10-acre farm as a 1,000-acre cotton farm, right? In terms of the time that they have invested in that policy. But the other thing too, maybe, is just that the actuarials are probably not as favorable to producers as maybe they should be in terms of what producers are actually coming back with in terms of indemnities versus their cost. I would expect, there to be a lot more indemnities here at the US level with 1,800 policies than what we're getting back. But, I think this says that the producers are maybe more diversified than RMA actually thinks they are, and where they calculate their claims. But here, similarly, you can go on the cost estimator, put in micro farm for Navajo County, and put in like the same numbers we had over there. And then here, you just only add one enterprise here, which is that you pull down there, and it's just a micro farm there. When we look at the cost and the subsidy, so you can go up to 85% coverage. So on your $10,000, you can go up to 8,500, but note that the subsidy rate is only 64%. So your subsidy is actually less here at 8,500 than it is at 80% or at 75%, because they give a higher, that maximum subsidy rate is at that 84%, 83.6%, after the accounting for the administrative costs. So that's another, I guess, kind of a jump in the policy to just kind of think about there with are you better off being back here at the 75% or here at the 85%, because you don't get as high a subsidy rate there, which translates to lower subsidy on that part. I know this is a lot of numbers, but hopefully it just gives you the concept that you can go to the website here and kind of work through an example on your own, and even see these numbers here, not in this table format, but you can pull them off of the website there and look at that if you want. So again, it's just up to $100,000 in revenue coverage. And the other thing that, like I mentioned, was kind of interesting is that it can include some post-production activities as the revenues. So if you were like producing strawberries and then making the jam, it allows you to go to that next step, kind of after you've added that value, and ensure on that the revenue on that. And that can be quite significant when you're looking at a lot of the small farms here. And that's the other thing too, is they found that like $100,000 basically covers 85% of most of the small farms out there in terms of the revenue size. So that is kind of what this new program here is meant to do. So we'll see if we have any more increases in signups and any more activity in the next year here. And again, you don't have any, they're not concerned about, like in the whole farm revenue, you had to be concerned about a yield for each crop and a price for each crop. So if you have 3 different crops, say you had cattle, you'd have to have a yield and a price, expected price there. If you had, sweet corn, you'd have to have a yield there and expected price for the sweet corn. Whereas with the micro farm, they're just looking at what is the total revenue for the year that you have established, and you don't have to establish those individual commodity ones. Make it a little easier there to go forward there. The other thing to consider too, and this could be why we don't have maybe as many signups as well as we might think for the whole farm revenue, is that Farm Service Agency also offers the non-insured crop disaster assistance program. I don't know, Jan, you probably don't get involved in the NAP coverage at all, or do you? Yeah, you don't. But basically, the NAP coverage here, basically provides a base coverage here. It's kind of like a catastrophic coverage level of that 50% of production, 55% of the market price. It's free, for the first 10 years of your operation as a beginning farmer there. So, and you can buy up coverage to 65% of the expected production and 100% of the market price. And beginning farmers are eligible for the waiver of the sign-up fee and a 50% premium reduction. So there are some farms I know that have said that they do this here instead of whole farm revenue because it works out to be cheaper for them as long as they're a beginning farmer. I know that this one individual said, well, they had 2 more years left. And after they ran out of being, their 10 years of eligibility on the beginning farmer, then they were thinking about maybe possibly going over to like the whole farm revenue or the micro farm. So this could be another reason why maybe we don't see as many signups there as well. So just to kind of conclude here, I guess, is that we do see a lot of revenue insurance here. I think that's going to be here to stay just because that's a lot more of a better insurable product there for us to track in terms of both production, market, and financial risk. The revenue is going to cover all of those. It's not just going to cover the market in terms of the price or the production. With direct marketers, I think we might see a switch maybe to some of this micro farm, just because 85% of the direct marketers would probably fall into this, having less than 100,000. But there is the NAP that's out there as well, maybe better. And the other thing to note too is that our input costs are not covered in any of these insurance programs, right? So with the pandemic and prices of inputs going up on a lot of things, I know fuel's come down some, but just being able to get fertilizers and everything else going up higher, that's a risk that's not covered in these. So just keep that in mind, that it's not insuring the margin like in the dairy program they have, where it's basically insures the difference between the costs and the revenues, that margin. Where here we're just insuring more on the revenue side, so the costs are not considered there. And also keep in mind these discounts and fees being waived for the beginning farmers, do make it more attractive, being a beginning farmer. So the other thing on this here grant, they put together a Qualtrics survey there. So if you want to take a few minutes here now, we'll leave some time here to go through this eval. If you want, you have to pull out your phone that's ringing and put it up there, and it should allow you to bring up to the website. Or if you're on the web, you can click on the link down here as well too. It should take a few minutes to consider. I've got several more slides that I've left in there. You can look at them on your flash drive if you want, but I decided probably wouldn't go through those just because there's a lot of numbers we've already gone through, and a lot of different things there. So, any questions, comments? Is the QR code working for people?
So.
Eh,
Like we're a little bit early, maybe the first time in recession, which is awesome. Before and I saw, so a couple conversations maybe to have around the crop insurance is. One, is it required for an FSA loan to carry crop insurance? These are not questions that have been asked, these are questions that have come up in
I
previous
see.
conversations. So I think that's the first one.
Well, it probably depends on it. I think it could be required if your loan repayment is that tight. It's where you have to get, above, say 80% yield or something like that, and give them more person. I mean, then that it could become a requirement. I know some people have had that required in commercial loans, that they have to have crop insurance. I mean, if you like they say, if you're growing anything in the high plains, West Texas, the first input you buy is crop insurance, and then you go and figure out uh, what else to put into it and how much you're going to invest. So, but there's not a rule requirement that you have to have it that I know of, like for a microloan, something that you have to have crop insurance. Yeah.
So then the second part is with the premium the farmer has to pay, even though it's subsidized, or say that word. Even though it's less than an amount where the taxpayers will actually take on part of that amount. That still has to get passed on in the product. Is that how most farmers will do that? Is they will do that in their pricing?
In terms of, okay, so I guess the thing is, yeah, I mean, if you were like selling directly and you're trying to figure out what is your break even price, yeah, you would have that cost added in there. But I guess the other way to look at it would be, is it could actually be a revenue generation as well on the side, So I mean, if the actuarials are correct, I mean, in the subsidy, say it's subsidized at 50%, like the pasture rangeland forage. Typically, we see that for every dollar the producer invests, they get two back related to that 50% subsidy being reflected in the data pretty correctly. Here with the whole farm revenue, I guess there's just so many variables involved. It does appear that we're seeing paybacks that are substantially above for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure anybody has a real good explanation why that is. So I guess I didn't answer the question. What was the question in terms?
Okay, so we deal with this a lot where,
Oh yeah, I think you're talking about in terms of the cost. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I mean, any expense, I mean, you would have work that into your what you would have to get back in terms of your product. But I guess what I would challenge them is to think about it. What happens if you don't do this? I mean, so you get flooded out and you lose 100% of your crop, or at least half of your crop. How does that get calculated in terms of your break-even cost as well? I mean, typically you can only price so much into the market, even if you're selling, chocolate basil, right? I mean, Miles told us that right now, right? Today, I mean, well, basil's basil when it comes, price is too great. So, I mean, you have to always keep that in mind in the sense that, all farmers are essentially viewed as being more price takers, right? Than price setters. That's one of the things that's offered in terms of the direct marketing is you're just not as much of a price taker. You can maybe, set more of your price, but, at some point price tends to matter. When you look at the factors that people will look at. Food safety is up there high, but price is right up there as well too. Yeah.
And just last thing is, as a farmer who's going through this and doing this process right now and figuring out this, I cannot emphasize Schedule S enough. For if you're gonna do any, even if you don't agree with government influence at any point in your time, if anything happens at any point in time where you want some sort of coverage or you want to be protected, and you're working with the agencies, those Schedule S are basically going to be invaluable in reporting your financial information. I can't tell you how many times now that they have actually come up into conversations, or I've needed to present them in paperwork, or they've been a subject of a conversation regarding what I'd be eligible for versus, all this other stuff. So when it comes to any of the protections, the insurance, and even as far as the loans, you have to just make sure those Schedule Fs you have a person helping you with those, because they can make or break. I've seen them do both. They've been helpful and they've just been a hindrance if you don't use it correctly. So
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the Schedule F can help you take advantage of a lot of the expenses you have to offset on your income. Plus, I mean, it is an official document, once it's filed, so I mean, there's really no substitute for that Schedule F in terms of like these programs here. Yeah. So I know a lot of people are hesitant because they're like saying, oh, now Uncle Sam knows where I'm at. They're going to be auditing me and everything else. But, it's possible you may get audited. But the downside is that if you don't ever file a Schedule F, you won't ever qualify for any of these programs, so.
there's so many awesome programs to take advantage of. I mean, there's so much support in the agricultural world that doesn't feel like it, but there actually is if you have your documentation in a line.
Yeah.
When you have those things and you presented on before the business plans and all these other things. If you have those in a line and you're able to work with both NRCS and Farm Service Agency, there's so many programs to help farmers.
And the Schedule F is even invaluable too, like if you're in kind of an area that's not classified necessarily as farmland, because I know some people have had to try to get their taxes changed to where they were ag land status and not ranchette. And the only way they could do it was, through the Schedule F in terms of showing this is how much they ag income that they've generated off of their place. And especially with some of the smaller places, smaller acreages out there, that's going to be very important because there's a huge difference in terms of your land being valued as ag land versus anything that's, ranchette or anything, even city, town. So.
What do they consider 40 acres?
Well, part of it comes down to whether you're able to show that you can make a living off of it. One of the reasons why so much of a lot of these small places in Arizona, they'll lease to the rancher for free that's next door, is because then they have a big enough unit that they can then call it ag land, because now it's all contiguous with that other big rancher that has enough to verify it. So I know down in Sonoyta and other places, they've just given the neighboring rancher the right to graze so that they can get the ag tax status. Yeah, it's because it's huge. I mean, one of the reasons why dairies are probably the most able to benefit in developing or holding on to land before it gets developed is because they have a viable ag operation on a fairly small acreage. I know some people that, like where the Chandler Mall is there, I mean, they went from a dairy to selling that at the square foot. And they like, Joey is like saying, boy, yeah, it's not a bad thing selling out by the square foot. But I mean, it's like, that is they truly had a justifiable ag existence, even though they were surrounded by commercial properties right there, because they were a dairy and they managed to keep it as a dairy, and maintain, even though the acreage was fairly small, uh, until the mall came next. Yeah.
I think what I looked at when I was looking at getting ag status on a 40 acre was that you can't do it with cattle.
No, you can't with cattle
You have to
because,
have like a minimum of 20 animal
Yeah.
units to qualify, and your land won't support that, so.
right, that's why they have to merge with
Right,
or join with a neighboring rancher or something. Yeah.
I think out where we live, it's zoned as agricultural. So,
Yeah. So then maybe you're all set. Yeah.
So any other questions? So, we still have a few minutes. And the presenter has not logged on yet, so let's take about.
Yeah. Take it.
Break.
Sure. That sounds great.